Welcome to Special Investigator, a podcast devoted to classic true crime murder stories. But today, I'm introducing our first Preview Friday show. That's when I preview, get it, preview, our next true murder story, coming up on Monday. But first, two little tidbits from Wednesday's show. In regard to the off-duty cop at the Chick-fil-A shop in Boston, the name of the knife attacker who the cop shot and killed is Lamarck Jaramillo, a 32-year-old resident of the predominantly residential Boston neighborhood of Roslindale. And according to Boston PD, he's a legal resident of the United States. Not much else has been released thus far. Second, I talked about the Marianne Mitchell kidnapping, rape, and murder from way back when I was in high school, and that the killer, Elmo Smith, was arrested, convicted, and put to death by Old Sparky in the Eastern State Penitentiary. Eastern State is no longer a prison. It's a museum and a tourist attraction. Tours are available, and there are special events at Halloween and Christmas. Elmo Smith was the last person executed at Eastern State Pen, and Eastern State was the first prison to host Al Capone as one of its guests. Now, let's talk about Monday's murder case. I'm doing it first because it holds a sentimental place in my life. It's the first true murder story of mine that was published. It was published in the August 1991 edition of Official Detective magazine. I was living on the Caribbean island of St. Croix at the time, working as a school teacher, bartender, and sports writer. The murder took place on St. Croix's sister island of St. Thomas. Both islands are part of the U.S. Virgin Islands, and it was huge front page news because two people were slaughtered in a voodoo-style killing. Official Detective titled it Virgin Islands Voodoo Slaughter, which for our purposes I've shortened to Voodoo Slaughter. I'm not going to get into many details of the murder today, saving that for Monday. Today, I'm going to give you some history and background about the island of St. Thomas and describe the setting, the scene of the crime. By the way, I lived on St. Thomas a year or so later. If you remember the rich girlfriend I mentioned in the introduction to Special Investigator, she invited me to move in with her. As it works out, I'd gone out to Hollywood to write the pilot screenplay for a historical series that was going to be set in the Caribbean. I'd quit my jobs and moved out to Venice Beach. My son went with me to accompany me and to expand his life experiences. Unfortunately for me, the production company ran out of money. So my son and I had the decision to make. Should we stay or should we leave? We both liked the geography and the climate, but we weren't crazy about the people. So we're going to head back to Philly. But when I mentioned the change in plans to the rich girlfriend, she asked me to move in with her on St. Thomas. She said she believed I had a brilliant future as a writer, and she was going to subsidize me until I started selling stories and making money on my own. So my son returned to Philly and I moved to St. Thomas. She lived in a cliffside home near the top of Donkey Hill, a good way up the hill, near the top, with a spectacular view overlooking the Frenchman's Reef Resort Hotel, the Charlotte Amalia Harbor, where the cruise ships land, and you could see the islands of St. Croix and Puerto Rico on the horizon. That said, now let's take a peek at the history of St. Thomas. Our murder story begins on March 2nd, 1988, but the history of St. Thomas began nearly 500 years earlier, near the beginning of November in 1493. That's when Christopher Columbus made his second voyage to the New World, and he discovered the still uninhabited island, which he named St. Thomas. But Columbus found the island unimpressive, so he sailed on. He discovered St. Croix on November the 14th, and then he continued his voyage and discovered Puerto Rico on November the 19th. For the next 200 years, St. Thomas remained uninhabited. Eventually, its sheltered bays became the base of operation for the real pirates of the Caribbean, and it became the home base of operation for privateers such as Sir Francis Drake, who laid in wait for merchant vessels sailing between Europe and the New World. Then he scuttled them and seized their cargoes. Then, in 1671, King Christian V of Denmark chartered the Danish West India Company to take possession of St. Thomas and to establish 50 sugar plantations. On August 30th, 1671, two ships with combined crews of 116 men and 61 convicts set sail for St. Thomas. The ships landed on February the 26th, 1672. Following the king's directives, the settlers built a fort, laid out a road, and established the 50 sugar plantations that King Christian mandated. But that was all the development that took place over the next 100 years. Then, in 1815, St. Thomas became a free port. Its capital city of Charlotte Amalia transformed itself into the commercial hub of the Caribbean and started importing and exporting most of the goods traveling back and forth between the Old World and the New World. Nearly 100 years later, in 1914, most of Europe was embroiled in World War I, but the U.S. opted to remain neutral and adopted a policy of non-intervention in the war. However, on May 17, 1915, a German U-boat torpedoed the British ocean liner RMS Lusitania off the coast of Ireland. The ship sank in 18 minutes and lost 1,198 passengers. That sinking turned international opinion against Germany and opened the eyes of public opinion in the U.S. From that point on, the federal government in Washington feared that unrestricted submarine warfare, much like the pirates of yore, posed a serious threat to both the Panama Canal and the U.S. mainland. So President Woodrow Wilson authorized the payment of $25 million to Denmark to purchase St. Thomas, along with the sister islands of St. John and St. Croix. And on March 31st, 1917, American flags were raised over the three U.S. Virgin Islands. The islands remained under the rule of the U.S. Navy until 1931. Then the islands became an official U.S. territory and have remained such ever since. During the 1950s, air and sea travel increased. St. Thomas became a paradise destination. And by 1988, 2 million tourists and vacationers were visiting the 28 square mile island every year. Some returned home, but others traded in stateside hustle and bustle in exchange for the lure and beauty and tranquility of St. Thomas. And they never left. Two such people were Genevieve Lewis and Steve Cornish, the two murder victims in our upcoming story. This is the scene of the crime, Vessup Bay Beach. It's a long stretch of white sand on the far eastern tip of St. Thomas, close to the port town of Red Hook. To this day, the beach is mostly undeveloped with lots of trees, sea grapes, and other plants. It's a serene setting to take walks and free your mind from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. So that's the history of the island and the scene of the crime. On Monday, I'll present Voodoo Slaughter. Hope you enjoyed our first Preview Friday. And that's it for today. Until next time. And that's a wrap.